Welcome to WST Stories. I used to believe that your home was your castle, a place where you were king. But what happens when the neighbors decide they don't like the color of your crown? Elijah Vance, a retired black engineer, thought he had found his piece of heaven on a quiet plot of land in Texas. He built a fence. He planted a garden. He minded his own business. But his homeowners association had other plans. They saw him not as a neighbor, but as a problem. The fines started small. Then they grew. $100, $1,000. Before he knew it, he was facing a bill for $270,000 and the threat of losing everything he had worked for. But they made one fatal mistake. They never bothered to read the fine print on the land they were standing on. This is the incredible true story of how one man's quiet dignity and a secret hidden in a decade-old deed brought an entire system to its knees. The laugh? The Williamson County Courthouse was a place of quiet reverence. The air inside tasted of old paper and polished wood. Every sound seemed amplified: the rustle of a sleeve, the soft clearing of a throat, the distant hum of the air conditioning. In that sterile silence, a number was spoken into existence. The lawyer for the Homeowners Association, a young man named Clinton Finch, stood tall. His voice was crisp, confident, practiced. He concluded his statement with a final, declarative figure: $270,425.30. Thanks for watching. It's not men of the one boast of never why and deplays the passive the mother waiter. The number hung in the air. An impossible sum. It was a weight designed to crush. All eyes turned to the defendant, Elijah Vance, a man of 58, with streaks of silver at his temples and the calm, steady hands of an engineer. He sat in his well-worn suit, a figure of quiet dignity. Across the aisle, Karen Miller, the president of the association, watched him. Her posture was ramrod straight, her expression a mask of civic duty. This was her moment of victory, the culmination of months of procedure, of rules. But Elijah did not look worried. He did not look defeated. He simply leaned back in his wooden chair, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face. And then it came. A laugh. It was not loud. It was not mocking. It was a deep, warm sound, rich with an irony so profound it seemed to fill every corner of the room. It was the laugh of a man who knew the punchline to a joke that no one else had even heard yet. The sound echoed in the sudden, dead silence. Clinton Finch froze mid-sentence. Karen Miller's perfect composure finally cracked, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. The judge himself looked up from his papers, a question mark hanging in his gaze. That laugh, that sound of impossible confidence, was not born in a courtroom. Its story began 6 months earlier. On a quiet Tuesday in April, under the warm Texas sun, Elijah's house was his sanctuary. It did not sit inside the perfect, manicured gates of the Willow Creek Estates. It sat just beyond them, on a 5-acre plot of land shaded by old oak trees. He had designed the house himself, years ago. A place of clean lines, large windows, and quiet spaces. After a lifetime of building complex software systems, he found his peace in simpler things: the feeling of cool earth on his hands, the scent of tomato plants in the afternoon heat. He was in his garden that day, pulling weeds from around the base of his young pecan trees. When he saw the mail truck pull away, he walked the gravel path to his mailbox. A simple, sturdy wooden box he had built himself. Inside, among the usual circulars and a letter from his daughter, was a single, crisp envelope. It was heavy. The paper was thick, expensive. In the top left corner, an embossed logo gleamed in the sun: the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. He carried it back to his porch, wiping the dirt from his hands onto his jeans. He slid it open with his thumb. Inside, there was no greeting, no personal note, just a single sheet of letter-sized paper, filled with cold, formal language. It was a notice. A violation. His new fence, the one he had just finished installing along the edge of his property, was the subject. The letter spoke of unapproved design elements and a failure to maintain community-wide aesthetic harmony. It mentioned bylaws he had never agreed to, and standards he was not bound to uphold. And, at the bottom, a fine. $100. Elijah read the letter twice. He was a man of logic, a man of contracts and code. Things were either true or they were false. His property line was a clear, legally defined fact. The association's authority ended at that line. This letter was an error, a simple, arrogant error. He set the paper down on his porch table. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak trees above. From his porch, he could see the identical, beige houses of Willow Creek, their lawns perfect, their windows vacant. They looked like a picture in a magazine, tidy, controlled. He looked back at the letter. He saw Karen Miller's name printed at the bottom, below the title of president. He remembered her from a few brief encounters over the years. A woman who moved with a sense of rigid purpose, whose smile never quite reached her eyes. This was not an error. He realized slowly. An error could be corrected. This felt different. This felt like a first move. A test. He did not know it then. But that single sheet of paper was the first shot fired in a war he never asked for. A war over property. Over rules. Over the very definition of community. A war they thought he could not possibly win. But they did not know what he knew. They did not know about the deed, sleeping silently in his safe deposit box. They did not know that their perfect, orderly world was built on a foundation he owned. And so, he folded the letter. A quiet resolve settling over him. The fight had come to his door, and he would be ready. The deed. That single piece of paper sat on Elijah's kitchen table, a silent declaration of war. But his confidence, the quiet resolve that had settled over him, was not born from defiance alone. It was rooted in the past, in a memory from 12 years ago, a time of blueprints, handshakes, and carefully chosen words. Back then, this land was just 50 acres of untamed Texas soil. It was his dream, purchased with a lifetime of savings from a career spent wrangling complex software into submission. He saw it not as an asset, but as a promise of peace, a legacy for a family that was scattered across the country. He would walk the rolling hills, the sun on his back, imagining the house he would build, the grandchildren who would one day chase fireflies through the tall grass. It was a canvas for the final, quiet chapter of his life. Then came Arthur Davison. He was a property developer of the old school, a man whose word was his bond and whose handshake was as solid as the foundations he poured. Davison saw potential in the land, a vision for a high-end community he would call Willow Creek Estates. He made Elijah an offer, not as a corporation talking to a landowner, but as one man to another. Elijah listened. He was not against the idea. He knew progress was inevitable, but he would not be a passive seller. He would be a partner in the vision. He walked the property with Davison for weeks, pointing out the oldest oaks that must be preserved, the natural drainage paths that should be respected. The engineer in him saw the land as a system, one to be worked with, not conquered. He agreed to sell 45 of his 50 acres, but on his own, methodical terms. He kept the best 5 acres for himself, a prime section with a gentle slope and an uninterrupted view of the sunset. But he negotiated for more. In his lawyer's office, surrounded by the smell of old books and fresh coffee, he had insisted on specific language being added to the deed of sale. His lawyer at the time, a practical man named Ben, had raised an eyebrow. "This is unusual, Eli," Ben had said, tapping a paragraph on the document. "Retaining underlying ownership of the access road and the plot for the mail kiosk, it's creative. White take happen as laden. It's a failsafe," Elijah had replied, his voice calm and certain. "It's insurance. You build systems with backdoors and redundancies. Ben, you should build a life the same way. You never know who your neighbors will turn out to be 10 years from now." So genestivation, Arthur Davison had respected it. He saw not suspicion, but foresight, A shrewd move from a man who understood that the true value of a contract lay in the details no one else bothered to read. They closed the deal with a firm handshake, a shared understanding between two men who respected the power of a well-written document. That document, that deed, was now Elijah's anchor. He walked from his sunlit kitchen to the small, quiet study at the back of his house. From a fireproof safe tucked away in a closet, he retrieved a thick, leather-bound folder. The air inside smelled faintly of aged paper and ink. He ran his fingers over the original agreement. The clear, precise language, a comfort to his orderly mind. The survey map, with its bolded lines showing his retained parcels, was not a matter of opinion. It was an unambiguous, legally recorded fact. He had helped create Willow Creek Estates. He had sold them the very land that gave them their existence. And now, the leadership of this community, people who had arrived long after the ink on this deed was dry, were sending him notices about aesthetic harmony. It was an absurdity of the highest order. He placed the folder back into the safe. The heavy steel door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, a sound of finality. As he turned the key, he whispered to the empty room, a thought directed at the memory of his old business partner. Arthur would never stand for this. Backs to allays the feet, but any weight important fan stood. The thought did not bring him anger. It brought him a profound clarity. The problem was not the community Arthur had envisioned, a place of neighbors and shared space. The problem was what it had become under new leadership, an engine of control, and he knew, with the certainty of a proven equation, that his next move had to be just as calm and just as precise as the language in that old deed. The siege. Elijah did not ignore the letter. That was not his way. An engineer does not ignore a bug in the system, he addresses it directly. He sat at his desk, the morning sun streaming through the window, and composed a polite, formal email to the Homeowners Association. His tone was professional, devoid of emotion. He explained, simply and clearly, that his property at 1225 Live Oak Trail was not, and never had been, a part of the Willow Creek Estates development. He attached a high-resolution scan of the official county plat map, with his property line highlighted in a neat yellow line. He pointed out the relevant section in their own bylaws that defined the community's boundaries. He hit send, believing that logic would prevail, that the facts would speak for themselves. For 1 week, there was only silence, a quiet that felt less like resolution and more like the drawing of a deep breath before a storm. Then, the siege began. It was not a direct response to his email. It was a deliberate escalation, a campaign conducted not with reason, but with paper. Every Friday, like a grim, unwelcome clockwork, a new envelope would appear in his mailbox, each one heavy with the same expensive paper, each one bearing the same embossed logo, each one containing a new violation, a new fine. The association, led by Karen Miller and her vice president, Rick Sterling, had begun a war of attrition. Rick Sterling was a man who measured the world in square footage and commission checks. He was a real estate agent, and to him, Elijah's sturdy, self-built fence was not a boundary marker. It was a negative market indicator. Elijah's individuality was not a right. It was a variable that threatened the tidy, profitable uniformity of the neighborhood, a risk that needed to be neutralized. The violations grew more and more absurd. A descent into bureaucratic madness. His pickup truck, a clean and well-maintained vehicle parked on his own gravel driveway, was cited for being a commercial-style vehicle left in public view. The 2 Adirondack chairs on his porch, painted a pleasant shade of sky blue, were deemed an unapproved exterior color choice. Even his thriving vegetable garden became a target. A notice arrived, citing the unpleasant aroma of the organic compost he used. A nuisance. It was a word they seemed fond of. Nuisance. Each letter came with a fine, $100, then $200, and with each fine came new, invented fees, multiplying like bacteria, a late processing fee, even when he had paid nothing, an administrative review fee, a non-compliance documentation fee. The numbers were designed to overwhelm, to intimidate, to exhaust. Elijah's quiet morning routine was shattered. The first cup of coffee on his porch, listening to the birds, was replaced by a ritual of grim documentation. He would open each letter. He would read the latest absurd claim. He would scan it. And he would enter the details into a spreadsheet on his computer. Date, violation number, description, amount. He watched the total climb, a silent, digital testament to their relentless, organized harassment. He was an engineer, and this was how he fought back against chaos. He turned it into data. The piece he had worked his entire life to build was being systematically dismantled, one envelope at a time. The quiet joy of his retirement was being poisoned by a constant, low-grade anxiety. Every time he heard the mail truck on the road, his shoulders would tense, a knot forming in his stomach. This was the true cost, not the money. The piece, the final straw, arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. It was not a standard envelope. It was a certified letter, green and ominous. He had to sign for it. Inside, the language was different. It was dense with legal jargon, cold and sharp. The board of directors had voted unanimously. They were placing a lien on his property, a claim, a legal hold. The letter ended with a thinly veiled threat, a chilling phrase about initiating foreclosure proceedings, to take his home, to take his land. The war of paper had just become a threat of total annihilation. The nuisance had become a clear and present danger to everything he held dear. From the small annoyances, Elijah now faced the risk of losing everything he had built. The line between nuisance and oppression is sometimes very thin. Have you ever had to stand up for what you believe is right, even when you were all alone? Share your thoughts in the comments. The ally. The letter about the lien was a different kind of weapon. It was no longer about fences or the color of chairs. This was an existential threat, a legal maneuver designed to corner him, to break his will. This was the moment Elijah acknowledged a hard truth. Logic and data were not enough. He could not fight this alone. He needed an ally. He needed a lawyer. He did not look in the phone book or search online. He made a call to an old friend from his engineering days, a man whose judgment he trusted implicitly. That call led him to a small, unassuming law office on the second floor of an old brick building downtown. The name on the frosted glass of the door read, Aisha Roberts, attorney at law. She was the daughter of his old friend, a young woman with a reputation that preceded her. She was known for being sharp, tenacious, and utterly unafraid of a fight, especially when the fight was against a bully. Aisha's office was neat, efficient, and filled with natural light. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled not with dusty legal tomes, but with modern casebooks and binders. Not a paper was out of place. She greeted him with a professional, cautious warmth. She had heard the basics of the case from her father, and she listened patiently as Elijah began to speak, her expression revealing little, likely assuming it was just another standard, albeit nasty, dispute with an overzealous homeowners association. Then, Elijah did not hand her a few letters. He lifted a heavy, black accordion file box from his bag and placed it on her polished desk. The box landed with a soft, definitive thud that seemed to absorb all the sound in the room. Aisha's expression shifted. Her professional distance evaporated, replaced by a flicker of genuine curiosity. Inside the box, there were not just papers. There was a system, dozens of files, each neatly labeled with a color-coded tab. Correspondence, notices, photographs, bylaws. At the very front of the box was a printed copy of his spreadsheet, a meticulous, column-by-column log of the entire siege, with dates, times, violation codes, and the escalating fines. She saw in that moment that Elijah Vance was not just a panicked client looking for a savior. He was a methodical, organized man under duress. Her respect for him deepened into genuine interest. She began to read, her sharp eyes scanning the documents, her fingers moving quickly through the files. She was silent for a long time. The only sound in the room, the soft rustle of paper as she connected the dots. She saw the pattern immediately. The targeted nature of the complaints, the vague, subjective language like aesthetic harmony. The carefully worded phrases in the letters that hinted at something deeper and uglier than a dispute over bylaws. This was a campaign, a coordinated effort. Elijah found himself speaking not just about the fines, but about the feeling of being watched, the loss of his privacy, the quiet wearing down of his spirit. For the first time, he let the full weight of the last few months show. Not to a family member he didn't want to worry, but to this sharp-eyed young woman who was a stranger and a professional. He trusted her process. Aisha listened, her gaze never leaving his. She was the daughter of a civil rights lawyer. She had grown up in a house where justice was not an abstract concept, but a fight you waged every day for people who couldn't fight for themselves. She recognized the scent of this particular kind of battle. It was old, familiar, and ugly. When Elijah finished, she leaned back in her chair. She looked at the box of files, a fortress of evidence, then back at him. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm, but it held a new, steely edge that cut through the quiet of the room. "Mr. Vance," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "They're not suing you over offense. They're suing you over your presence. Thanks for watching. We condemning the matter explaining the rate, but it know what." Hearing the thought spoken aloud was a profound, anchoring relief. It was a validation of the unnamed feeling that had been sitting in his gut for months. He found in Aisha not just a lawyer, but someone who understood. Their partnership was forged in that moment, built on a mutual respect for facts, for preparation, and for the quiet dignity of a righteous fight. He had brought her the data. She would provide the fire. She looked at him, a strategic light dancing in her eyes. "They think they have you cornered," she said. "They expect you to defend, to react, to settle. We're not going to do any of that. I'm shoulda not back to Vargard." She leaned forward, her hands flat on her desk. A commander planning her first move. A decision had been made. The tide was about to turn. "Mr. Vance," she said, a small, determined smile forming on her lips. "We are not just going to put out this fire. We are going to sue them for arson. I'm shoulda not back to Vargard." The decision to fight back was made. A turning point. The defensive posture was gone, replaced by the promise of an offensive. The real battle was about to begin. The gambit. Aisha did not wait for the association to file their foreclosure suit. She did not believe in waiting to be attacked. She believed in seizing the narrative. So she launched a preemptive strike, a gambit. In the quiet of her office, she drafted a comprehensive lawsuit against the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. And, crucially, against Karen Miller and Rick Sterling as individuals. The charges were clear and severe: harassment, violation of property rights, and housing discrimination. The lawsuit landed like a thunderclap on a clear day. Karen and Rick, so accustomed to being the ones issuing threats from behind the shield of their board titles, were suddenly exposed. They were no longer just board members. They were defendants. Their personal assets were now tied to the outcome of this fight. The hunter had become the hunted. The slow, grinding machinery of the legal process began to turn. The discovery phase. It was a methodical game of chess, played with motions and filings instead of pawns and kings. Aisha formally requested every piece of internal communication related to Elijah Vance. Every email, every text message, every note scribbled on a napkin during every board meeting. The association's lawyer, Clinton Finch, tried to stonewall. He filed motions to quash, claiming the requests were overly broad, that the communications were privileged. But Aisha was relentless. She was a bulldog in a courtroom. She countered every move, citing precedent, patiently but firmly pushing the judge to compel disclosure. And finally, after weeks of legal skirmishing, the floodgates opened. Hundreds of emails and messages were turned over in digital files. Aisha and Elijah spent long evenings in her conference room, a projector humming as they sifted through the digital records. A picture began to emerge, line by line, email by email. It was a dark and calculated one. They read conversations between Karen and Rick, casual discussions about how to apply maximum pressure, Memos about using late fees as a tool not for collection, but for intimidation. And then, they found a key phrase, repeated in a thread started by Karen. She was complaining about Elijah's refusal to comply. She wrote that his presence was not a good fit for our community's demographic. We also daddy. The phrase hung in the air of Aisha's office. Chilling and precise. It was subtle, coded, but the meaning was unmistakable. This was no longer about offense. It was about a face. Karen's public reaction to the lawsuit was to double down. She sent out a special newsletter to the residents, painting the association as the victim of a frivolous and costly attack. A necessary defense to protect the shared investment of every homeowner. Rick Sterling, on the other hand, began to panic. His calls to Clinton Finch became more frequent, his voice tight with an anxiety that was purely financial. He saw his reputation as a top agent in the area beginning to tarnish. The first cracks in their united front were beginning to show. Clinton Finch, the young lawyer, was caught in the middle. The evidence was piling up, and it was making him deeply uncomfortable. He had a duty to represent his clients. But the words on the screen in front of him told a story of malice he could not ignore. Late one night, scrolling through a dense chain of messages, Aisha found the final piece of the puzzle. It was an email from Karen to Rick, sent months before the first letter ever reached Elijah's mailbox. Karen was frustrated about something unrelated. And then she segued. She wrote, "The problem is the original contract Davison signed with him. It has too many loopholes. We both know that. Legally. Our hands are tied. We never get into the game, and I have described in Herbert outly day of the spection." Aisha read the line aloud, her voice quiet. Elijah closed his eyes, a slow, deep breath escaping his lips. It was a quiet moment of profound validation. They knew. From the very beginning, they knew they had no legal standing. Their entire campaign was a bluff, a siege built on a foundation of bad faith. They were not enforcing rules. They were trying to bully a man into submission because they had no other way to win. The gambit had paid off. The board's secrets were exposed. The path to the courtroom was now clear. The cracks. Aisha's lawsuit had done more than just put the association on the defensive. It had sent a tremor through the foundations of Karen Miller's authority. And the cracks were starting to show, not just in the boardroom, but within the community itself. Clinton Finch, the HOA's lawyer, requested an urgent, closed-door meeting. In the sterile, impersonal conference room of his downtown law firm, he laid out the situation in stark, unambiguous terms. The air was thick with unspoken tension. "Your case for the fines is weak at best," he said, his professional calm barely masking a deep-seated concern. He gestured to a thick binder on the table. "Mr. Vance's countersuit, however, is strong. The emails are extremely damaging. As your counsel, I am advising you to strongly consider a settlement. Thank you for watching with a never ida now wage, but of watching from all of his wage. They respect in the Mormon as compluting in Macht, Biob 5 Kabul." Karen's reaction was immediate and sharp, her back stiffening. "Absolutely not," she snapped, her voice cutting through the quiet room. "Settling is an admission of guilt. It would set a dangerous precedent. We will not be intimidated. We are protecting this community's standards and its property values. And he was maybe so haven in buys of lost and you have might, as of not bright to there was one ream on it." Rick Sterling shifted uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair. He stared at the polished surface of the mahogany table, unable to meet either Karen's or the lawyer's gaze. "Karen, the legal fees, they are already substantial," he mumbled, his voice tight with anxiety. "If this goes to trial and we lose, the damages could be significant." The word he didn't say, but that hung heavy in the air, was personal. Aisha had sued them as individuals. Their own assets, their own homes, were on the line. "It is a matter of principle," Karen insisted, her voice rising with righteous indignation. "It's a matter of financial risk." Rick countered, his voice barely a whisper. The rift between them had widened into a chasm. He was a businessman, and this was a bad investment spiraling out of control. Meanwhile, the lawsuit was a matter of public record. And some residents of Willow Creek, contrary to popular belief, actually read public records. One of them was Beatrice Jensen, Bea, a retired librarian in her late 70s, with a mind as sharp as a tack and a quiet, observant nature that missed very little. She had been one of Karen's first friends in the neighborhood, years ago, drawn to her energy and sense of purpose, but over time, she had grown wary of Karen's increasing rigidity, her obsession with a kind of sterile, enforced perfection, driven by a librarian's instinct for the truth. Bea went to the county clerk's website. She found the case file. She spent an entire afternoon in her sunlit reading nook, scrolling through the legal filing, including the damning excerpts from the emails Aisha had submitted as evidence. She felt a cold knot of shame form in her stomach. The coded language, the calculated campaign against a quiet neighbor. This was not the community she thought she lived in. This was something ugly. She printed out a few key pages. That evening, she walked across the street to her neighbor's house. A retired couple she played bridge with every Thursday. The next day, she visited another old friend 2 doors down. She did not raise her voice. She did not engage in gossip. She simply presented the facts, the documents, the words written by their own board president. "I think we need to talk about what is being done in our name," she would say softly, her voice carrying the gentle, unshakable authority of a lifetime spent among books and truth. The cracks were no longer just in the boardroom. They were spreading, quietly, wire, from house to house. Along the perfect, tree-lined streets of Willow Creek, a silent rebellion was brewing, fueled not by anger, but by the quiet, undeniable, and deeply uncomfortable weight of the facts. The witness. The emails were a powerful weapon. Cold, hard, undeniable facts. But Aisha Roberts knew that facts alone don't always move hearts in a courtroom. Sometimes, for a story to truly land, for a jury to feel the weight of an injustice, you need a human voice, a witness, a guide. Her research into past board members led her to a name that appeared frequently in older meeting minutes but had vanished a year ago: George Findley, a retired architect in his early 70s. He had served on the association's board for years, right alongside Karen, but he had quietly resigned. Without offering a public reason, Aisha had a strong hunch as to why. She and Elijah arranged to meet him at a small, quiet coffee shop, miles from the prying eyes of the neighborhood. George was a gentle man, with kind, weary eyes that held a deep and lingering sadness. He was hesitant to talk at first, spending a long time stirring his black coffee, his gaze fixed on the swirling liquid as if it held some profound answer. "I left because I couldn't be a part of it anymore," he finally said, his voice low and raspy with disuse. It started small, enforcing a rule about the placement of trash cans with an almost religious fervor, arguing for weeks about the acceptable shade of beige for a new front door. But then, it turned its focus to Mr. Vance. George explained that he had argued against the campaign from the inside. He had reminded Karen and the others that their bylaws didn't apply, that they were exposing the association to a lawsuit they couldn't win. She wouldn't listen, he said, a faint shake in his head. She saw it as a crusade. She told the board he was a threat to the character of the community, that his property was an eyesore that would bring all our values down. As of Master Percet of this, he finally looked up from his coffee and met Elijah's gaze. His own eyes filled with a quiet, profound shame. "I should have done more," he admitted, the words heavy with regret. "I should have spoken out publicly to the other residents. But it's hard, going against the group. It's easier to just stay quiet. So I walked away." As of Master Percet of this, Elijah listened to the man's confession without a hint of judgment in his expression. When George finished, he didn't offer condemnation. He offered a bridge of understanding. "It takes a lot of courage to stand alone, George," Elijah said, his voice soft but firm. "Sometimes, just walking away is the only thing a good man can do to keep his own peace." Pretty set, the maid came as the round with the munder and sass of Saul Whiting and said it. That was the moment everything changed. It was not Aisha's legal persuasion, but Elijah's simple, unexpected act of empathy. George had expected anger, or at least a cold satisfaction. Instead, he found grace. He saw in Elijah not an adversary seeking ammunition for his case, but a decent, honorable man who had been deeply wronged. He took a deep breath, the first one that seemed to fill his lungs completely in a long time. He looked directly at Aisha, his indecision gone, replaced by a newfound clarity. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Aisha explained that she would need him to testify, to tell the court exactly what he had just told them. It would not be pleasant. The association's lawyer would cross-examine him. His former friends and neighbors in Willow Creek would likely see him as a traitor. George nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it. He looked across the table at Elijah, and a quiet, steely resolve settled in his eyes. He extended his hand across the table. "I'll be there," he said, his voice steady now, cleared of its earlier hesitation. "It is past time someone told the truth." "Well, do you want?" Elijah shook his hand. It was a firm, solid grip, the promise of an honest man. The final, crucial piece of their case had just fallen into place. George Findlay made a choice. A difficult one, but the right one. Elijah's journey for justice is nearing its end, but it has also been a very lonely one. If you are still listening, please help me by commenting the number 1 below, so I know I still have companions on this journey. Your presence is the greatest encouragement for me to tell the final part, the part we are all waiting for. The cross-examination. The courtroom felt different now, charged with a new energy. The story had returned to its beginning, to the moment just after Elijah's laugh had echoed in the silent room. But now, that silence was filled not with confusion, but with a shared, breathless anticipation. The first day of the trial began, and the air was thick with unspoken questions. The association's lawyer, Clinton Finch, stood to present his case. He was professional. He was thorough. He meticulously walked the judge through a timeline of notices sent and fines levied, citing bylaw numbers and dates with a practiced cadence. He projected images of Elijah's fence, his blue chairs, his thriving garden. He painted a picture of a man willfully ignoring the reasonable standards of a community. But his presentation lacked a crucial element: conviction. He sounded like a man going through the motions, his voice devoid of the righteous fire a lawyer needs when they truly believe in their cause. He knew what was in the emails Aisha had submitted as evidence. He knew the very ground beneath his feet was legally shaky. Then, it was Aisha's turn. Her presence commanded the room. The plaintiff calls Karen Miller to the stand. And the 7. Karen walked to the witness box with a practiced, confident stride that broadcasted her authority. She wore a tailored navy blue suit, a modern armor of respectability. She placed her hand on the Bible, her gaze fixed on the judge, and swore the oath to tell the truth. Her voice clear and unwavering. She was not just ready for this fight, she relished it. In her mind, she was the guardian of order, the protector of a way of life. Aisha began her cross-examination gently, her tone disarmingly conversational. "Mrs. Miller, could you please tell the court, in your own words, what is the primary mission of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association?" "Our mission," Karen began, her voice smooth and polished, "is to maintain the standards of the community, to protect the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood, and thereby, to protect the property values for all our residents, as stated in, and is actually discreet. An admirable goal," Aisha said with a nod. She let the statement hang in the air for a moment. "And to achieve this goal, you have a set of bylaws, correct?" "That's correct. A comprehensive set of rules that every homeowner agrees to abide by when they purchase a home in our community. In one of the prison of the back in the cardet, and was walking different the torges last con of the pose. Every homeowner in your community," Aisha repeated softly, letting the last 3 words echo. Then, she changed tack. She placed a document on the projector. It was an email, its text stark against the white screen. The first of many. "Mrs. Miller," Aisha said, her voice still calm. This is an email you sent to Vice President Sterling. Could you please read the highlighted sentence for the court? Karen squinted at the screen. A flicker of something annoyance perhaps crossed her face. Her confidence wavered for the first time. It says, we need to apply maximum pressure to achieve compliance. Tana getting naft, tase of vand. Police can stage a, thank you, Aisha said. Maximum pressure. A strong choice of words. What exactly did you mean by that? Mrs. Miller? It means ensuring compliance, Karen said stiffly. It means following up on violations with diligence. It is an actional ready and that's so high in station, as that means. Aisha put up another email. This one was addressed to Rick Sterling and another board member. And here, Aisha continued, her voice level. You wrote that Mr. Vance's continued defiance was not, quote, a good fit for our community's demographic. Could you please explain to the court what specific demographic you were referring to? A low, collective murmur rippled through the gallery. In the front row, Rick Sterling sank a little lower in his chair, his face pale. I was referring to the demographic of people who do not respect our community's rules. Karen stammered, a faint flush creeping up her neck. The answer was too quick, too practiced. It sounded hollow. Aisha moved forward, relentlessly, methodically. Email after email, document after document. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She simply presented Karen's own words back to her, holding them up to the light of the courtroom for everyone to see. The calm, surgical precision of her questions began to dismantle Karen's carefully constructed composure. Piece by piece, the polished armor began to crack. Karen's answers became shorter, sharper, more defensive. She started to interrupt. The mask of the concerned, civic-minded community leader was slipping, revealing the face of a petty tyrant, enraged and bewildered that her absolute authority was being questioned. The final blow came not with an email, but with a simple question about a fact. Mrs. Miller, Aisha asked, her tone still even. On April 14th of last year, my client, Mr. Vance, sent you an email. In that email, he attached a copy of the official county plat map, a legal document clearly showing his property was outside the association's jurisdiction. Do you recall receiving that email? I received many emails, Karen said dismissively. Waving a hand, you did receive it, Aisha confirmed, her voice hardening almost imperceptibly. We have the server logs. You opened it at 9:07 a.m. Yet you and the board continued to send notices and levy fines for another 6 months. Why? If you had evidence that you lacked jurisdiction, why would you continue? Karen hesitated. Her eyes darted to her lawyer. But he could offer no help. He was staring down at his legal pad as if it held the secrets of the universe. She was cornered. Those legal details, she finally said, her voice dripping with a condescension that failed to hide her panic, are not as important as the spirit of the community. He was disrupting the harmony of our neighborhood. Someone had to act. Happen ten you cames explain my cowardice. Aisha paused. She let the words hang in the stunned silence of the courtroom. The spirit of the community was more important than the law. It was a full confession, not of a crime, but of a mindset, an admission of a belief in her own authority above all else. A fatal one. No further questions. Your Honor, happen 10 you cames explain my cowardice. As Karen Miller stepped down from the stand, she looked smaller, diminished. Her confident stride was gone, replaced by a stiff, uncertain walk. Her face was pale, her confidence shattered into a million pieces. The case they had built, a seemingly solid fortress of rules and regulations, had been exposed for what it was, a hollow facade, built to hide a personal vendetta. Clinton Finch looked utterly defeated. Aisha turned to Elijah and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The moral battle was won. The court of public opinion, at least within those four walls, had rendered its verdict, but the legal checkmate was yet to come. The checkmate. The second day of the trial began with a palpable shift in the courtroom's atmosphere. The gallery was fuller now than it had been the day before. Word had spread. Residents from Willow Creek, including B. Jensen and her small but growing circle of concerned neighbors, sat watching, their faces a mixture of anxiety and grim curiosity. They had come to see how this story, their story, would end. Aisha Roberts stood, her presence filling the room with a quiet authority. The plaintiff calls Professor Alistair Finch to the stand. And Majin of them, insurgents of them, a quiet gasp, followed by a ripple of whispers, went through the room. Alistair Finch, the same last name as the association's own lawyer. Clinton Finch looked up from his notes, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. Alistair Finch was not just any expert, he was his former property law professor from the University of Texas. A legendary figure in the field, a man whose textbook Clinton himself had studied. It was a brilliant, theatrical, and utterly devastating move. Professor Finch, an elderly man with a gentle, academic air and a tweed jacket that had seen better decades, took the stand. Aisha led him through a series of simple questions, establishing his unimpeachable expertise. Then, she directed his attention to a large, color-coded map on an easel, a high-resolution blow-up of the original survey map from the deed signed by Elijah and Arthur Davison 12 years prior, with the patient, methodical clarity of a seasoned teacher accustomed to explaining complex ideas to young minds. Professor Finch began his lesson. He explained the legal concept of an underlying parcel. He described a retained interest. He used simple analogies, comparing it to owning the land beneath a highway while the state owns the pavement on top. Then, he used a long, wooden pointer to trace the thin, red lines on the map that Elijah had so carefully negotiated all those years ago. As you can see from the unambiguous language of the recorded deed, the professor said, his voice resonating with scholarly certainty. While the individual homeowners own their houses and the lots they sit on, the legal ownership of the land beneath this specific access road, this road right here, and this small common area here, was never transferred to the association. It was retained by the original seller's holding company. That mine not of the Vario in the Costa. The tensions of the clast of the called as a pad of Loger. He moved the pointer. It landed squarely on the spot on the map where the Willow Creek Estates Community Clubhouse stood, their headquarters. The very building where the board met to levy their six-figure fines against Elijah Vance. A dead, profound, and absolute silence fell over the courtroom. Rick Sterling's face, already pale, went completely white. He looked physically ill. Karen Miller stared at the map, her mouth slightly agape, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified comprehension. She was a queen who had just been informed that her castle was built on someone else's land. They were not just misguided neighbors. They were, in the strictest legal sense, tenants on property controlled by the very man they were suing. Aisha let the revelation sink in, giving it space to breathe, to fill every corner of the room. Then, she began her closing statement. She walked to the center of the courtroom, standing not just before the judge, but turning slightly, her gaze sweeping across the residents of Willow Creek, addressing the entire community. Your Honor, she began, her voice steady and powerful, ringing with conviction. This was never a case about offense. This was never about the color of chairs or the smell of a garden. This was a case about abuse of power, a case about a board that decided their personal preferences were more important than a man's property rights. And lest it being don't have verify the small within the one, there's no state. She recounted the campaign of harassment, the carefully coded language in the emails, the damning testimony of their own president, but the final with breathtaking irony of this entire affair, she continued, her voice rising with quiet, controlled passion, is what Professor Finch has just made so abundantly clear. This is not just a story of a homeowners association harassing a man who was not under their jurisdiction. This is the story of an association that, while standing on land they did not fundamentally own, tried to legally seize the land of the man who did. One of the Sile de Dappling, and in that moment, the entire narrative the entire 6-month ordeal circled back to its beginning, to the laugh. It was not the laugh of arrogance. It was not the laugh of malice. It was the laugh of profound, cosmic irony, the laugh of a patient, methodical engineer who had built a failsafe into a system 12 years ago and had just watched, with quiet astonishment, as the system's own operators blindly walked directly into it. It was the laugh of a man playing a long, quiet game of chess, who had placed his opponent in checkmate before they had even made their very first move. The judge's gavel came down with a sharp, final crack that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. He dismissed the association's lawsuit with prejudice, ensuring they could never file it again. He ruled in favor of Elijah on all counts of his countersuit. It was over. Elias stood slowly, buttoning the single button of his suit jacket. He did not look at Karen or Rick. Their power over him had evaporated, turning to dust. He turned and walked toward the heavy wooden doors of the exit, his posture straight, his head held high. As he stepped out of the courtroom and into the light of the hallway, he was met with a sea of faces. His neighbors, some looked away, their faces etched with shame. Some glared, their resentment palpable. A few, like Bea Jensen, met his eyes with a look of quiet, profound, and sorrowful respect. The legal battle had ended. A verdict had been rendered. But the struggle to heal a broken, divided community that was just beginning. Ultimately, this isn't just a story about land deeds. It's about what happens when rules replace humanity. It's a lesson in how small powers can lead to great injustices, and a testament to how one person's quiet courage can challenge an entire system. Elijah's victory reminds us that the strongest foundations are not made of concrete, but of dignity and truth. Has this story made you think differently about community? We would love to read your reflections below. For more stories that explore the human heart, we invite you to subscribe to WST Stories. Thank you so much for being a part of our audience today.